There's also live transcript available for the call. Openscapes is an initiative to help researchers do better science in less time together. Through our Champions Mentorship Program, we help research teams develop habits for data-intensive science that is more open, reproducible, collaborative, inclusive, and kind. All Openscapes activities are bound by our code of conduct, and some of the essence is that we are respectful and value each other's ideas, styles, and viewpoints, and we can all lead by example and match our actions with our words. My name is Stephanie Butland. I'm a member of the core Openscapes team. I live and work on the traditional lands of the Kamloops to Secwepemc within the Secwepemc. These are the traditional and unceded territory of the Secwepemc peoples. One thing I do to learn more is attend the annual Kamloops powwow. Cookstemp for joining us today. With today's conversation in this community call, we want to dig into what each of us can do to connect our daily work to the climate movement. How do we connect big problems like climate change with little problems like sharing different versions of files or automating annual reports? We want to focus on two groups of people and explicitly connect these to contributing to the climate movement. If climate and environment is the part of your day job, how do you leverage open science? Or if open science or data science is part of your day job, how do you connect that to the climate and environment? So today, for the first 30 minutes, there will be a celebrity interview, followed by 20 minutes of continued conversations from questions that you contribute in the doc or in the chat. We aim to end by about 5 minutes before the top of the hour. We're building a culture here where we all help each other out, and together we can create a rich shared resource from this conversation. So I'm going to screen share to give you a tip about how we can all do this. So this is a doc that we typically use to take collaborative notes, but it's a bit of a big thing to navigate. So if you want to be able to navigate in the doc, I click View and Show Outline, and now the outline of headings and bookmarks appear here. So I'll point out that this link, we're inviting you to type your questions below. And so if I click there, it takes me to the bookmark where we invite you to type your questions, contribute your name if you like, and then maybe we'll invite you to unmute and ask your question. You can add +1s to show your interest in somebody else's question, and even add your own responses to the questions because we all have some level of expertise here. Right below here, we have a prompt at any time during the session. You can contribute anything that you've done, been involved in,
can you come here?
Things you might want to be doing. And the ideas you share here may be inspiring other people. Now, when I want to navigate back somewhere in the document, I can click on the left side to get back to the welcome. I should also point out down there, we have a spot to share resources. We've seeded some of that, and we certainly invite you to add your own. So with that, I'd like to introduce the people who are doing most of the talking and sharing today. Monica Granados, Dr. Monica Granados is the Open Climate Campaign Manager at Creative Commons and on the leadership team of PREreview. Monica is an open science specialist and a trained ecologist. And our interviewer today is Dr. Julia Lowndes, the director of Openscapes. Take it away, Julie.
Great, thanks so much, Steph, and welcome everybody. It's so great to have everyone here. So, Monica, hello. We're excited to chat with you about open science, about all your work. Wanted to just start off by asking how are you doing this week, and tell us something about where you are geographically.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Monica Granados. I'm the Open Climate Campaign Manager and just in love with open science. And so I'm really excited to be here with a lot of other open science enthusiasts to tell you a little bit about my journey, what I'm working on now, and how we need your help, to continue the important work that we're doing. Today, I'm located in Toronto. One of the things that I love about Toronto is that it has 4 seasons, although the winter is much longer than the rest of the seasons. But I actually grew up in Tucson, Arizona. So I spent about, between the ages of like 7 and 18 in Tucson. And in Tucson, it's just like hot or more hot. So when I was really excited to move to a place that had four seasons, one of the downsides that I just realized though, that will affect this call is that I'm going to have to turn on the light at some point because the sun will go down in about 25 minutes at like 4:30 my time. And so it gets dark very early in the winter, unfortunately, but it does mean that in the summer we get some pretty long days.
Oh, awesome. Well, I guess it's fun to hear about where you started growing up and where you are now up in Canada, and wanted to ask you a little bit more too about your background as an ecology researcher and any story that you have about your experiences of kind of how you got to open science from ecology.
Yeah, I actually love telling this story because it's sort of like there was like a before open science and an after open science for me. And there's such a distinct demarcation for me. And it was a really pivotal event. I attended a workshop that was sponsored by the National Center for Ecological Synthesis and Analysis, which I think is a place that you're very familiar with, Julie. And really my intention to go to that course during graduate school was that I just wanted to develop my programming skills a little bit more. So I knew that they were going to talk about R, and so it was like, great, I hear this R is really important. I should learn a little bit more about it. And it really, what the course was titled was Open Science for Synthesis, knowing very little about like what open science was. And it was this like, I think a week-long course about open science and, taking elements of the research life cycle and talking about how each element of the life cycle that you work on, from developing your ideas and your methodology to the data analysis to the publication and then the dissemination, that all of those parts could be made more open and transparent, and that it had benefits for you, but also that I think it just is more true to the pursuit of science. That if we do science because we want to work on understanding the world better, making the world better, helping, especially as many of us are ecologists, understanding ecology and particularly if we work on conservation or climate change, that, we need to make this information as accessible as possible. Where these we're generating knowledge that can be mobilized to do good, and to do that in the most sort of impressive way. We want to do that openly. And I came home, honestly, a different person. It was transformational. Like I said, there is a before Open Science Monica and an after Open Science Monica. I came back to McGill University where I did my PhD, and just started looking for opportunities to talk about. It's like, have you heard about the gospel of open science? Have you heard about open science? And so started delivering workshops about open science, and got connected then to this amazing community that I just didn't know was there, of other people who were really enthusiastic about a different way of doing science. That what we were being shown in graduate school it was pretty archaic and was a product of my supervisor learning from their supervisor and their supervisor before them, that this is the way that you do science in a very closed protective manner, because you're incentivized to work that way. And so having this alternative. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was just curious to hear more about that. I think I also came to open science through code and through R, and actually, you and I talked about this. We have a similar path, both being at having this first experience at NC's, the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, and even meeting some of the same people in our Open Sci. And I don't know if you had any other sort of memories about when you were first seeing open science, or conversations you had with Karthik or with any of the other participants in the class.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what was really exciting, is that it was meeting a bunch of like-minded folks that were, like I said, equally passionate. And so learning that there are people who are dedicating their, their academic life to improving, or to like leveraging open science and to make it easier for people to do science. And that is where I was introduced to this project called Our Open Science. And you folks are probably all very familiar with it, but if you're not, it's basically like now at the time it was pretty new, but a package that you can add to our workspace to download a bunch of data remotely. And I remember there was a very specific example where they had taken information, I think from Daniel Pauly's book on fish, because that's what I was working on at the time, where you could, download information about, the life histories of fish. And instead of going through instead of going like into the book and looking up every single fish, like you could give it a data frame and say, give me all the information on this series, this like array of 70 fish or whatever. And I was like, this is phenomenal. And so not only was using this environment, I think in service of making science more accessible, but it's also just like really good as a researcher. Like it was incredible to me that like this isn't the status quo, that this is not the way that we're taught to do science, because it's so much more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, you started teaching more about open science and got more into open science as part of your job up with the Canadian government. And now you're at Creative Commons with leading the Open Climate campaign. So could you tell us a little bit about that and about the connection between open science and climate change?
Yeah, I think I'm so fortunate that I get to do open science as a career. For a long time, it was sort of like this thing that I was very passionate about, but like a hobby that I did on the side, because I had to graduate, I had to publish. At the time, there's probably a time where I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go into academia, but have like an open science lab. And then, there was increasing opportunities. I think also just due to the recognition of the importance of open science by institutions like the Canadian government, that allow me to specialize specifically on like working on open science policy. And so, I was really fortunate to work at the Canadian government in the Environment and Climate Change Canada. It was such a great training and development opportunity to, again, work specifically on open science and learn things like Gantt charts we don't learn about in grad school, right? Like some skills that were not really developed in graduate school. And so, now I got this really cool opportunity to work at the intersection of like the two things that I'm most interested in. One is like I'm an ecologist by training, and I did some work on climate change, particularly during my postdoc, and open science. And so the Open Climate Campaign is a 4-year project working towards making the open sharing of resources around research the norm in climate science. So it's really predicated on this idea that if you're working on the world's greatest problem, climate change, then we need to have as much knowledge on climate change available so that we can use that to generate solutions. So we can use that to generate, the best predictions for adaptation and for mitigation. So this 4-year project is really taking, we've got 11 goals that can kind of be distilled down into 4 categories. One is advocacy. So talking to researchers like many of you here, and to, really highlight the importance of the work that you're doing and how especially important it is that you think about how can you make your work as open and as transparent as possible, because you in your everyday work are generating knowledge that will help us get to solutions for climate change. And how do we connect you as researchers to tools that have been developed by the community and institutions and funding organizations, other organizations like Openscapes, that will show you how to work more in the open. We're on developing open access policies with funders, national governments, and environmental organizations, so that there's those incentives to work in the open, to publish in open access in the many ways that you can do it, not necessarily just through publisher provided open access that requires an article processing charge. We're working to make sure that it's a global campaign. I think there's been a lot of work in open scholarship that has focused the global north and it has centered the global north. And as a consequence, the policy decisions and recommendations that have been proposed from that global north perspective has disenfranchised even more traditionally excluded voices in open scholarship. And the last part that we're working on is also identifying really important climate change publications that have already been published. Some of these foundational papers that are cited, they're highly cited or may appear frequently in reports like those published by the IPCC, and making sure that those are open. So using a lot of tools, some provided by organizations and communities that have built around the concept of open science, or working with publishers and creating relationships with them, and having conversations with them about the importance of the research that they are publishing and how important it is to make that open.
That's so awesome. And how long has the campaign been going?
We're actually pretty new. So it took, I think, a long time to get the funding. So there was a lot of conversations about this concept and finding people to support it. We originally got some support from the Open Society Foundations to help us put this campaign together. And then we got a 4-year grant from the Arcadia Foundation. And officially launched in August, the end of August of 2022. So I would say that the campaign is still pretty new. We've got a website up that's got these resources for the target groups that we're working with. We're constantly out here looking for developing partnerships with other like-minded groups that that are thinking about this. And I know that Openscapes has been thinking about this. You had a great presentation at the our studio conference, where before even the launch of the campaign, you were thinking about this kind of question, and I had been thinking about it too. I'm really passionate about open science, and I thought, if we could pool our collective wisdom and resource and knowledge in the open space, where should we direct it? And I think it should be on the world's greatest problems, and climate change, I think, is really the most present problem, I think, for humanity. And there should be a focus on that. And so I think that's thinking that you've had as well.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of what sparked our conversation together, and then led us to this community call too, because we're we want to just talk about this more, and it's a conversation we want to open up, right? But yeah, in July at my I gave a co-keynote at our studio conf, and realized that the most important thing to me about this work is the impacts I see that we can have on climate solutions through open science. And I was like, how do I say that clearly and bravely in this conference talk about R and Quarto and the cool tools and the things we can do with data science and open science, but how do we amplify that and really connect that to these things that we're really passionate about and these biggest problems? Yeah, I think it's so cool. And I think kind of saying them out loud together is part of it. Something I think about is when I read books like All We Can Save. I've actually got it right here. I'll show it just because it's on my desk. But this book is about truth, courage, and solutions for the climate crisis. And it's vignettes by different women leaders in the US talking about leadership and climate change. And I read this book and see their stories, and it like gives me hope about climate change. And I like throughout it, I'm like reading it and I'm like, this could be open science. This could be open science. You know, when they're talking about like building this movement and like including people and thinking things through and sort of slowing down to speed up, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's open science too. Like, how do we bring these things together?
Yeah, I think it's just to like build a little bit on that. Another narrative that I like to think about is, you know, climate change is overwhelming. Like it's a complex problem involving many disciplines and many dimensions. And I think that overwhelmingness, you know, when you're doom scrolling on Twitter or whatever social media platform you're using, it can be really overwhelming. You know, you've got this feeling of like, well, like, what am I going to do to solve this like giant problem? You know, I'm just like, you know, I'm just one person. And then to turn that on its head and think about, well, like, what's the pool of resources that you can bring to this like complex problem? And don't think about solving, you know, this huge problem. Like it's going to require sort of multilateral work, but what you can bring in is like your expertise on open science. You know, like, how do we tackle climate change from like this angle or from like, you know, this perspective, knowing that, you know, we still need policymakers to make decisions, and we need fossil fuel companies to, you know, and we need green transition, and we need all of those things. But that's not where my expertise is. But I know a lot about open science, and how can I leverage this expertise to help solve, or, you know, help us get to some solutions around climate change. And I think that's sort of parallels what you're thinking of. It's like, take the open science perspective to a problem, and exactly, to this really big problem.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And like, you know, if you're, like sort of connecting kind of the little problems you might have with the motivation for those bigger problems. So like, you know, if you're feeling like copying and pasting things around and shuffling files and hand versioning, you know, the same document over and over, if you're feeling like that's not like how do you connect that with like climate change? And like, I want to fix this. I want to I want to be motivated by like this. Copying and pasting isn't getting us where we want to be fast enough. Who can I ask? Who can I like? There must be a better way. How can I talk to people? How can I think about like learning new skills? Or on the other hand, if you have skills, you know, around you know, automating things so you're not copying and pasting as much, and you felt empowered by that through open science, how to like check in on your colleagues and ask them how they're doing. Like where are you stuck, or like what doesn't feel great about your day-to-day, and how do we like empower that and connect that to the climate movement?
Yeah. And I think that hits on like something you had said in that keynote too, about like the variable of time, that I often draw the parallels between like the climate crisis and COVID-19. There was a really interesting response to COVID-19 by the publishing community, by the research community, like recognizing that like we could not wait like the traditional time, or like the, you know, the average time, which is like, you know, months, sometimes years, for results to be published, you know, as a version of record. And so there was this, you know, uptake in preprints and preprint practices. So like there's something like 80,000 preprints were published between like 2019 and 2021, which was like, this is exponential growth in preprints. 77% of COVID-19 publications are open. You know, when you compare it to like, you know, I think there's like 38% of publications from Canada are open. You know, that there's a really big contrast, because there was this like, this is a problem that is wide, like it's at the scale of, you know, global scale, has the potential to affect everybody, and we cannot wait for solutions to happen sort of organically. And so, you know, you just mentioned, you know, copying and pasting is like, you know, time that you're taking away from trying to generate that knowledge as fast as possible for a problem that is, there is a countdown to us having solutions in place to mitigate the big impacts to climate change. And so that's sort of another interesting perspective, that there's a time aspect to this as well, and that even just having code that runs more efficiently is something that you are doing that is contributing to getting to knowledge and then ultimately solutions faster.
Yeah, I think that it's so that time is so interesting on so many levels here, like that the idea that we we don't have time to waste because these challenges are so big.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the researchers we work with through Openscapes, often they're looking to even have 2 hours. They can't find 2 hours a week to make that more efficient today, so that it will be a click of a button next week rather than a bunch of copying and pasting. And it's like, so how do we advocate for time on both of those scales, that like I do need this 2 hours of time to learn how to automate this thing, so I won't be clicking and pasting for 2 hours every week going forward, that I can put that time towards addressing these. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious if other folks have thoughts on time too when we talk about it. Well, this is so yeah, I'm curious about more like concrete examples of like daily things we can do to connect open science and climate. Do you have what are other thoughts you have?
Yeah, we actually have we've done a little bit of thinking around this at the Open Climate Campaign, because we know that researchers are such an important stakeholder group because they're the ones that are generating that knowledge. So, what we want to do is to try to connect you with like some existing resources, because there's, a spectrum of understanding of open science, but also of open science. Like it isn't it isn't binary, where either like you don't practice open science or like you have opened all of the things. Like you can be somewhere in the middle, and it can be anywhere along that research life cycle, from like, the first generation of ideas, the ideation, all the way to the publication and knowledge mobilization. And so what we have on the Open Climate Campaign website is that we have like a list of resources that links you to, again, other like-minded organizations that have been doing work on specific elements of that research life cycle. So a great if we just take, for example, the publication, which is probably the most robust because it's so tangible. When you talk about open science and open access, when you talk about like a publication unit. And so we've got information about preprints, and what is a preprint? How can you preprint? What are the advantages of a preprint? There's an organization called ESAT Bio who's solely dedicated to telling you about how awesome preprints are. And so, our job at the Open Climate Campaign isn't to like reinvent the wheel. It's to connect you with like this really cool organization that has done a lot of work. They have information available in like English, French, and Spanish, all about like how to use preprints and why they're so great, and what are other like infrastructures that have been built around preprints to make science more transparent. We've got information about this concept of diamond open access. So, open access has a lot of colors. One to add to that is diamond open access, and it's this concept of having a publication that is open access, but you're not paying an article processing charge to open it. There's a couple of different models that can make that work. But from the researcher perspective, like your concern may only be that you can find journals that are discipline specific, that are specific to the work that you are doing, and you can publish in these journals at no cost to you and at no cost to your to people who want to read your paper as well. And so as you go down the research life cycle, we've got a couple of other examples, and again, sort of trying to act as a nexus to all of these programs, like Openscapes. Openscapes is also on our list of resources for training on how do you do reproducible research, using R as your as your medium. So yeah, that's at openclimatecampaign.org/resources. And we're hoping to go around and do webinars and in-person events. Like we're just planning to do something for the Ecological Society of America, for example, where we're going to be working with the NASA Transform to Open Science group to
Awesome.
who I was just on a call with Bree, funny enough, this morning. We're making the rounds here at the Open Climate Campaign.
Awesome.
So to introduce people to the concept of open science as well. So it's just a little taste of some of the sort of concrete work that we're doing and how you can get involved, right? Like this is a campaign to get researchers involved and sort of converted to open science.
Awesome. I'm just going to ask a couple more questions before we open it up to anyone else's questions in the chat or in the doc. So what are a few people or groups that inspire you in your work, open science or not? Where do you find inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are open science groups. I think we already talked about like our open science. Like I just thought that was like so neat. Like that was just such a wow moment. It's kind of like that feeling when you run your code for the first time and it works without any errors. And you're just like, wow. Like so when they were demoing our open science, like I just thought that was so neat. Like what a cool example of how to use this tool to empower scientists to do science like better. I was really inspired by Mozilla at the and I think you're a fellow, right? A former fellow. Yes. So Mozilla, it was like such an important group, I think probably for both of us. One of those organizations.
The live Google Docking, like alone, has just been completely life-changing for me. Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, well, we still use that at PREreview. Like that's how we do our preprint journal clubs. We use the Google Doc. We just, I mean, I think that was their intention was for people to take that and remix and reuse it. But yeah, that was such a foundational experience to be part of that open leaders group, to find that community. It really is to like, and this is what you're building here as well, to have other people who are passionate about this concept and find inspiration in each other. I think I once spoke at this Mozilla group where I was like, I looked forward every year to MozFest or, their sprints, because I was, I spent most of my year in an environment with people who are resistant to open practices. And then coming to this event was so, it was so energizing. And like, I just got, I think I said that it was like being like drinking water after you've been in the desert, for a year. Like these people were my water. And like every year after this event, I was just so empowered and so energized. So I miss those events, but I think the idea is that, we've taken what we've learned through Mozilla and tried to replicate that and build these types of communities like you're doing today.
Yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. Okay, one final question before we take other questions from the chat. What didn't we ask you that we should have, or what else is on your mind that you want to share?
Yeah, what else have I been thinking about? Yeah, that is a
Thanks,
great
Ellie.
question. Yeah. Like maybe like where the Open Climate Campaign will be next. I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about that today. And I would love to hear where you would love to see the Open Climate Campaign like go. I think we have, like I said, we have plans to go to the Ecological Society of America meeting. We're thinking about going to the AAAS meeting, so the American Association for the Advancement of Science meeting in Washington, D.C. We've got a newsletter where we'll announce places that we're going to go, but we're a small team. We're only really 2 people. We've got a lot of people who are, we've got partners and steering committee that are helping with the campaign, but officially, like, I'm the only full-time staff. So I'm biased by my experience and knowledge. And so I would love to hear, like, what would you love to see the Open Climate campaign, and what's maybe something that we missed too?
Yeah.
Like, I'd love to hear that from the attendees today.
Yeah, that's a great prompt. Kate had said "yay fish" before. Like, there's a lot of fisheries folks here, and some fisheries, some big ocean conferences coming up. Open Science with Oceans is really important. So I don't know if folks have ideas about conferences. Yeah.
Or if you know of other, like, organizations that, like, sit at that intersection. I think that's something that, like, we've been talking about together with Openscapes, is like, what are other groups that are thinking about this space? I know that there's also there's a group called the Open Climate Calls that I have, like, a call for fellows right now, that are looking for people who are looking. Yeah, I'll find the link, who are looking to thinking about this question of open, but very broad, open, and then very broadly with climate. So not just, like, the scientific aspect of it, but the social science, the humanity aspect of it. So that might be interesting to folks as well.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Steph, I will turn it over to you for curated questions, and I have more questions too, if but
we're just getting into the role of so many questions. I am thrilled. This makes me so happy that there are a lot of questions in the doc. I'll put the link that I think should take you to that heading. Ellie, I'm wondering if you had a couple of questions. So I'm wondering if you would choose one and ask it.
Oh gosh. Well, they're kind of related. Can I just snowball them?
Do it.
Okay, thank you. So the questions were, are you thinking about semantic technologies as a form for supporting this open science work? And the reason for this question is because, of course, I am, and we're actually connecting over with a group at NASA to kind of build tools based on semantic technologies that can support collaboration and coordination. So there's kind of this one big problem about information share and legibility and transformation and all of these things that we can kind of help in some ways with the semantic tech. And so that's the base of the question. And then the kind of the corollary is, what are the processes that we should be trying to support with systems like this? Copying and pasting is obviously a waste of time. What else?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So before I do you know about the Semantic Climate Group?
No, I don't.
Okay, great. So I will tell you all about it, because I was just yesterday on a presentation with them at the UN. They're this amazing group that I have connected with. So we haven't been thinking about that, to answer your question. I mean, I think about it more broadly as someone who has been in the open science space, that when we talk about access, that's we're literally just talking about, like, physical access to it. Like, can I go and, like, read it in whatever format it is? But accessibility is quite, even within that, there's a spectrum of, like, what accessibility can really mean. And so, that may mean a simple example is language, right? So, like, someone may be able to download a paper, but if they don't speak English, which is the dominant language that science gets conducted in, they could download that open access article, but they can't really, parse the information from there. And so, to answer your other question about, like, well, copying and pasting is something that you might be working on, but, like, how can you enable translation? How can you enable, like, translation from the native PDFs that journals love to use to something that can be automatically translated, and removing all of the formatting errors? And that's something that the Semantic Climate is thinking about. And so, yeah, they gave a presentation yesterday really around this idea of how can we broaden access and moving more into like true accessibility of knowledge within particularly the IPCC reports. And so what they're doing is like they're converting it, I think, into like HTML to be able to like fully utilize what is presently a PDF and be able to do some like data mining and text mining of the report. So like they had examples of like creating word clouds and being able to like click technological terms and being able to define them because they get linked to a dictionary. So many has just, thank you so much.
I'm going to interrupt you, Monica, because there are like so many questions. There are more coming.
Okay.
So I'm going to.
Okay, there's more coming. So anyway, semantic climate, they're great. I'm going to turn on the light because now it's getting dark in here.
Okay.
So next question.
I'm going to jump around to a couple and I will ask you to give your soundbite version of whatever the answer is. Sam, would you be willing to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. The kernel of my question is that I work with a lot of people in different sciences doing open science stuff, and they're sort of emerged like a kind of baseline, what you do if you're doing open science. And a lot of that just doesn't work for climate. And people often in conversations are just like, wow, that stuff is too big. So I was curious what your thoughts are about that. Like the holdup often is, how do you reproduce a model or a model run? How do you deal with the data or the code or the supercomputer that was required to essentially do that run in the first place? If you're truly, like, your results can be open, but you really can't ask people who don't have that kind of institutional affiliation and honestly like computing power to reproduce those results. And that's often a holdup in the climate conversation, showing the authenticity of those models, but then being unable to sort of reproduce them in other ways that other scientific disciplines can take advantage of.
Yeah, that's a super good question, and I recognize that that's the reality when you've got big data sets, to make it really simple. My first is to assure people that by making your results open, that you're participating in open science, that you don't have to have like a fully reproducible model to be working on like bettering science and making your results as open as possible. I think it's a lot of it could just be like frameworks, like what's the, can you give a framework of the methodology that you use, even if you don't have like the computing power to reproduce that model? Like how much information can you, it's sort of like giving having a really good method section for like, what's the process that you used? Because I think those like infrastructure constraints will probably always be there and will require funding to be able to do that work. But I think the biggest argument there is just like, make your publications and your data open, and you're still participating in this and advancing science and making it easier for other people to advance on your results.
Thank you, Monica. Martin, do you want to unmute and ask your question? And then Kate's on deck.
Bonjour, Monica.
Bonjour, Martin.
Maybe it's a side question, but I'm just curious about, based on your experience, what are the main differences that you encountered in how open science is moving forward in governments, universities, and elsewhere regarding open science in general, but maybe more specifically on climate change?
What I really loved about working at Environment and Climate Change Canada is that I love that all the policies sat within like a unit. So it was all within the federal government, meaning that I always thought there was just so much potential to radically transform the way science was done in the way federal science was done, because you could change all of the pillars in that institution simultaneously. So like you could change the incentives by changing TBS's framework for promotion. You could, you can change policies by having an open access policy for the federal government or for your specific institution. And you can change the funding internally as well to have the framework or to have the infrastructure funding. And so I just think that is such a has such potential to change very quickly in a way that I think in an institution would be really difficult to do, because the policies are in different places and could be at like different levels of organization, as opposed to the federal government, where like EBS could make a change like this and it would radically transform the way that you would have to do science, and then you could support it by changing budgets. So I think that is what is really different, is that like there's a lot of potential, but not a lot of expertise. So I thought that there's not a lot of expertise in the way that the federal government has a lot of senior management that are generalists, and then they don't often really understand like the intricacies of what is needed to support open science. And so it would slow down the process because the potential couldn't be realized. But I still think that if we continue to have offices like the Office of the Chief Science Advisor, a lot of changes can be made, because they can ask for a policy change at that really high level, and it trickles down to the department levels. And that's why we developed, an open science action plan, was because the Office of the Chief Science Advisor, so this sort of like high national level office, said you have to make one. And so they did. Similar to the Nelson memo, right, that just came out. Nelson memo said everyone's gonna have to have policies, and that is going to be transformative.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. Kate, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, also thanks for letting me know we're calling it the Nelson memo now, rather than the OSTP complicated policy. Nelson memo, much shorter. Agree that it could be really transformative. I think people are also freaking out. So will be good to have people who can help support them and make them feel more open. Sorry, trying to be short. So the Nelson memo, we'll put that in the chat. It's the recent Office of Science and Technology policy memo that came out of the US that says, if you get federal funding, essentially in any way, shape, or form, your data have to be open. And you have a timeline by which it has to be open.
And your papers. Yeah.
And your papers. Yeah. So big potential deal. But I wanted to ask about the excitement that you're at Creative Commons. And I'm a big Creative Commons fan, and have spent a lot of time looking at their licensing provisions and how appropriate data licensing can really unlock better data collaborations, and particularly because Creative Commons licensing can be made into machine readable licenses, not just sort of written, pasted licenses in a PDF. So I'm curious if you have the opportunity to learn from how Creative Commons licenses have been used in other sectors that we could apply to climate licensing. That's like, here's how we got data out of this group because they could use a license and because they felt comfortable with this. Can we replicate that with businesses who don't want to share data around climate data, or academic institutions who are hesitant and want to make that data IP? And then I asked if Chris Erdman could come in, and he kindly said yes, to say like, and how much should funders kind of mandate that in grants? And what role can funders do by saying, here are the standards we expect our grantees to follow in terms of data licensing?
Yeah, so to work backwards, I think funders have a lot of power to make like transformative changes. I mean, that's the reason why the Open Climate Campaign specifically wants to work with funders, national governments, and environmental organizations, people who control the money, because that you're incentivizing a change. And so we have worked before with mostly in the open educational space. So I'm just speaking from not from personal experience, but organizational experience, where they have worked with funders who are creating open educational resources, and they have explicit provisions in their grants that say, if you're going to take money from us, then the products that you produce have to have this specific license, usually a CC BY license on information, or in this case, educational resources. So, that's part of the work that we want to go and do, is go and talk to funders and bring our expertise of like creating policies and expertise and experience in knowing what are the best kinds of licenses that will help further openness and sharing, but also keep in mind like your specific needs for your organization. And so we're going to be developing open access policies, but also talking about, the data associated with the publications, and then other sort of research products that they may be funding as well. And so coming in, getting to work with Creative Commons and learning about different licenses and trying to, you know, it may sound biased, but it's really helpful to also just have like one infrastructure that everybody works with, like the Creative Commons licenses, because then they're like interoperable with each other as opposed to like newly created licenses. Yeah, and maybe the teaser that I will give you is that the Open Climate Campaign specifically doesn't have anything for open data. We're focusing on publications and then having conversations around other outputs using the publication as sort of the unit to talk to people about it, including sort of our target organizations. But we have recently received funding to specifically look at open data and how do we sort of build a way to better share open climate data with specifically like the great example that you gave that is often a barrier with like private institutions or private entities that don't want to share their data. Like what's that? Do we use like a data trust model to enable that type of sharing? So we're going to be having more conversations. And if you want to keep in the chat, we're going to be looking for experts. In fact, actually, we're going to be hiring somebody as well. And so if you're interested in that, please get in touch about that. But yeah, we're going to be building sort of a working group. And so, Kate, it sounds like you would be a great person to be part of that group.
There's a lot of dancing going on in the video about data trusts. Yay. Monica, meet Kate Wing. There you go. I need to move into closing, but since you did call on Chris Erdman, I'm just wondering if there's anything, Chris, you wanted to say before we move into closing.
Hi everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces. I've been called out, but yeah, like I would just say that I think you're going to see a lot of, so I'm in a position, an open science lead position at a funder. And I think you're going to see a lot more of these kind of positions. There already are some, but like, I think exactly that's what I'm doing is looking at the underlying data. So we've funded all this research. How are researchers sort of responding to our policy? So specifically, I have looked into licensing data, and I think that's where we will become more proactive and actually go back and actually steward and curate some of the data. So now systems allow for this. So we're actually talking to Dimensions and Crossref, about those kind of things. And but yeah, like there's no real plan yet, but I'm doing analysis on that particular thing, and I think that that's just an example. I think a lot of funders will get a little bit more proactive in this space and ensure that that we have one of these proactive policies. I maybe I can put it in the chat here, but that's what I'm analyzing is how well we've done as far as the policy for Michael J. Fox Foundation. So anyways, yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. This time always breaks my heart because it's when things really get going and then we have to close. It's 5 minutes before the top of the hour. I understand if anyone needs to leave, don't feel bad that you have to go. I want to thank Monica and of course Julie, but on behalf of the Openscapes team, particularly thank you, Monica, for sharing this time, your knowledge, your enthusiasm with us, and your teasers and things like that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll try, if we have additional answers and resources to add into the doc, we'll try to answer some questions if we can. Thank you so much for adding the extra resources. I encourage people to have a look because there's really a lot there. Key messages we want folks to leave with. Yes, your day jobs can be part of the climate movement, one small step at a time. And just talking with a colleague about it and saying out loud what you're thinking is part of this. And maybe you can find a way to take 2 hours in a work week to meet up with a buddy and talk about these things, or reduce the amount of time you spend copying and pasting, because it's not just the reducing, copying and pasting, but imagine if you started saving this time, what you might be able to do with that extra time you're not spending repeating these motions. This has been recorded, and we will post the video probably next week as part of a short summary blog post. We like to finish every one of these sessions with an efficiency tip of the day and an inclusion tip of the day. So for the efficiency tip, I am going to share my screen. And this is another one of our, open science practices, like share your screen, let people see what you're poking your way through. So if I want to quickly move or easily move between tabs that I have open in my browser, and this is just an example, a lot of people have like 50 tabs open. So if I hit on a Mac, the Command and Option keys, I can use the right arrow to cycle through each of the tabs that I have open. And on Windows, apparently, is Zotero running? No. Windows, apparently, that's Control and page up and page down. And sorry, my screen is now covered with something. Julie, could you read the inclusion tip of the day? I have something that showed up on my screen.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
The inclusion tip of the day is to make the implicit explicit. And part of that is sharing unwritten rules with new team members so you can write them down. That's part of kind of the onboarding process of, like, you know, efficiency tips or where things live or what is expected at meetings. You can write those down. And another is that the holiday season can be hard for some. So it's recommended that you just check in with the colleagues, ask how they're doing. And there's resources for leading and supporting coworkers that are linked from the doc at the bottom there.
Thank you, Julie. And thanks again, everyone, for spending this time with us. This has been a joyful hour that we spent together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Great to see you all. Thanks, Monica.
Thank you.